This is Chapter 11 of The Guardian of Ailos. Despite his confidence in Mina's ability to fight off evil worms, or whatever you call those demon dogs, her mental strength worried Nelson. He couldn't just let go of the fact that she, too, had been deceived by a vision of a loved one. And why did she blank out when thinking of them? Would he become like her? Come, come, she said. Off we go. Off to find sweet, sweet Sydney Sweet. Nelson was happy to hear her thinking of Syd at least. Where do you think... Shh! A sliver of silver light peered through the night sky. With her free hand and a surprising amount of force, Mina pulled Nelson back and pushed him behind Sheila. He had to duck to keep from running head first into the giant beak. Mina unsheathed her sword and stood, ready to fight. Nelson lowered his voice and tried again. What is it? What do you see? Mina just shook her head and pointed her sword toward the sea. Beyond the cliff, the sound of footsteps and heavy breathing drew near. Then, the cliff's edge started to glow, revealing a narrow passage, a staircase. Mina took a step forward as the light grew stronger. Nelson found himself squinting from behind Sheila's feathered neck. Instinctively, he reached into his pocket, searching for comfort. Even without it, the stone had a grip on him. With the feeling of an empty pocket and no Syd by his side, his heart started to race. He looked around for something to use as a weapon. Sheila didn't like the growing light much either. The two of them started to back away. Stop right there, Mina shouted, taking another step toward the staircase. I'm armed and skilled with the blade. If you come up here, you better be ready to fight. The light stopped. Whoever it was, they were listening. Mina? A distant, girlish voice cried out. Is that you? Now the light grew faster than before. It bounced as it ascended toward the edge of the passageway. Excited, Nelson started to run toward the light. Syd! Mina's hand grabbed him, sweeping him off of his feet. She held him, hand over his mouth, near her chest. Shh! She hushed him again, then whispered into his ear. We can't be sure. Shifty worms. Nelson whispered a muffled, okay, and nodded. I'm warning you. I don't take kindly to tricksters. The light stopped again. Then, Mina, it's me. It's Syd. Harold is hurt. It's bad. We need to find help. Mina gritted her teeth and gripped her sword tighter. She didn't like all the extra details. Sounds like something a shapeshifter would say. Harold? Nelson said to himself. Wait, Mina. He grabbed hold of Mina's shoulder as he whispered. A worm wouldn't know Harold's name. Nelson pushed past Mina's outstretched arm. I think it really is Syd. Syd, he yelled. Are you okay? I'm okay. Just a little banged up and tired from all these stairs. Is it okay for me to come up now? Nelson looked over at Mina, who appeared to be deep in thought. Yes, you can come up, Mina said, still unsure and holding her sword just as ready as before. Nelson smiled and started to run. A bright ball of light shot past him. For a second, he couldn't see a thing. But that didn't stop him. It was Syd. He knew it. By the time he reached the edge of the stairs, there she was. And without hesitation, he threw his arms around her. No! She yelled and pushed his hug away. Her hand struck him directly in the chest, knocking all the air out of his lungs. He crumpled to the ground. What did I... he gasped. I'm sorry. It's just... Harold. Syd lifted up the unconscious Marmot in the sling around her neck. I'm fine, he wheezed. He lifted a thumb to reassure her. Syd, Mina said as she sheathed her sword. What is this about poor Harold? I found him, Syd said, her voice shaking. I found him under some wreckage. Please, we need to help him. He's not moving. Here, let me take a look, Mina said. Her voice sounded steady and sincere as she helped slide Harold out of the satchel. Oh my, she said. This isn't good. Not good at all. Mina took Harold and walked over to what looked like an old fountain. She set him down on its ledge and began to inspect his limp body, mumbling to herself as she worked. Syd looked over at Nelson and smiled. Well, you just going to sit there or what? Nelson's mouth gaped open and a torrent of breath blew out. Oh, really? You get to knock me over and still I have to come to you? He sat on the cold cobblestone, scowling. Syd's smile grew larger. Well, I'm waiting. Nelson tried his best to hold his ground, but who was he kidding? His heart had never been happier. His friend was alive. The scowl broke, and the two of them joined together in laughter. Syd went ahead and stuck out her hand to help Nelson up. He gladly accepted, and upon standing, gave his friend a big, long hug. Are you okay? I saw, Syd pointed at Sheila, that thing grab you, and Syd lowered her eyes. I thought I lost you. Nelson blushed, but this time he didn't care. After everything, how could she still care that much? Me? He asked. I thought you were long gone. After the fire and the wreck, he paused and made sure to catch her eyes. I need to tell you something. I I hate to break up the reunion, but we better get going. Mina's motherly voice drifted over from the fountain. The island would have normally kept our enemies out for days, but unfortunately one of them is seen through the fog. As for our furry friend here, I was able to stabilize him for now, but we really should find him a place to sleep and some medicine. I think I know where to find some. Of course, Syd said, but before walking away, she turned and gave Nelson a quick little kiss on the cheek. I'm glad I found you, she said, pulling a piece of hair behind her ear. Nelson's face lit up, brighter than any magic stone ever could. A nervous laugh squeaked out, and without thinking, he mirrored Syd by pushing his own locks out of the way. I'm glad you found me too, he said. The two of them finally turned to walk toward Mina and saw her standing, one hand covering her smile, and her brow lifted in interest. What? Nelson asked. Oh, nothing, Mina replied. She turned to pick up Harold and then stopped mid-thought. Syd, do you think you can use that light of yours to find our way through the castle? That might save us some time. Syd looked at Nelson with suspicion. Was this the real Mina? And that bird, was it safe? Nelson nodded and mouthed, It's okay. For once, she looked to him. Shocked, Nelson felt his heart flutter. A big smile followed. Boldness rose up inside of him, and he nodded to himself in satisfaction. Okay, he thought. Maybe he could be a good adventurer after all. Syd's voice snapped him out of it. I think so, Syd said, looking back at Mina. Let me see. But before she could lift her locket, the light she was now accustomed to following zipped away toward the castle courtyard. It led them into the castle and through a giant hall lined with statues. Many of them looked oddly familiar, the girls at least. Mina and Syd were a few steps ahead of him, deep in conversation, and his eyes couldn't help but jump between them and the statues. Weird, he thought. It's almost like they're... No, that's ridiculous. No way Syd could be related to whoever these statues are. Could she? Mina, maybe. Hmm, Nelson mumbled. What's that? Syd asked, looking over her shoulder. Oh, nothing, Nelson replied. He really needed to work on keeping his thoughts to himself. Syd raised an eyebrow and shrugged, then went back to the conversation she was having with Mina. As they made their way deeper into the castle, Nelson felt his trepidation returning. The humid air inside smelled of mildew and dust, and his lungs weren't happy with the all-too-familiar smell. Nelson reached up to massage his throat. Was it just him, or was the air growing thicker? Like most of the world they had explored so far, the castle was mostly empty. Pieces of burnt and broken furniture were speckled throughout the different rooms, and some pictures remained hung, although most were torn or charred. The further they went, the more Nelson became frighteningly aware of his heartbeat rising. Eventually, the light led them into a giant bedroom. It looked like something straight out of a medieval fairy tale. Long, red drapes covering the windows, golden laced tables, a large wooden bed frame, the kind that has a roof, and a massive family portrait, at least That's what it would have looked like before the attack. Now, it wasn't much to look at, just dusty and cold. Still, Nelson found himself lost in his imagination. Maybe it didn't have to be this way forever. Maybe one day life could flourish here. Psst, Syd whispered. You coming? Nelson spun around from staring at the torn up painting. His eyes had been locked on what was left of a little girl's face. Does no one else see this? He thought. Well, yeah, he stuttered. I'm coming. The light stopped in front of an old, very dusty piece of furniture sitting next to the bed. A wardrobe, deep and dark, with doors wide open. The light blinked, almost like it was telling them to go inside. But Mina walked to the side of it and pushed. It scraped the stone floor, leaving marks in the dust as it moved. A secret passage? Nelson thought. Now that is pretty cool. It was indeed. Behind the old wardrobe, they found a set of stairs, a stone, spiral staircase leading beyond their bedroom, possibly even the castle itself. The light retreated into the locket, and Syd led them the rest of the way. Of course, it had to take us through the basement, Nelson muttered. Was he the only one skeptical about walking through the dark underbelly of an ancient castle? Watch your head, Mina called out, slapping a piece of fallen wood above her head on the last bit of stairs. And just in time, Nelson had his eyes glued on the mossy steps and almost walked straight into the low-hanging beam. Once making it onto even ground, he trotted up to Mina. Syd continued leading them down a tight corridor. What is this place, anyway? He asked. You don't know? Mina asked. Oh, my. Oh, me. I know there's a dragon, and he's pretty angry about being locked away. And I guess this is the land of Ailos that Syd has talked about. Pretty sure they had to lock him up because, well, he made all the mess we've seen. Not to mention those demon dogs trying to bring him back. Yes, yes, very good. But that's not all. It's not? I'm afraid it's more complicated than that. Mina stopped for a second and scratched her chin. Where should I start? She turned to Nelson and put a hand on his shoulder. Now, it isn't a fun story, dear Nelson, but I suppose your journey hasn't been much fun now, has it? She stared at Nelson for a second, searching for something, but then shrugged and went back to following Syd, talking as she walked. You know that book? The book your friend Syd has? Well, it contains stories. Stories of wonderful things. Things too great to imagine. They all ducked past a few more beams before turning right down another long hall. A long time ago, at the beginning of the worlds, when the three realms were still joined as one, this dragon you know about, well, he wasn't always a dragon. He was a man, a powerful man, filled with magic. And he was a brilliant musician. No way, Nelson said. That's right. His name was Ailos, Mina replied. And, Syd interjected from the front, his songs contained power. Lots of power. Yes, Mina agreed. The Maker himself assigned Ailos to help cultivate the land and build Ailos alongside the king and queen of his choosing. The three of them became closer than friends. They were family. With his power, Ailos drew water from beneath the earth to form rivers. His songs helped shape the hills and sprout flowers. Many even said that he taught the birds to sing. As they reached the end of the long hall, something small caught Nelson's eye, something glowing crawling across the floor. Syd, we've been here before, Syd joined Nelson. Sure enough, Syd stopped in front of a door, a small wooden door. When Syd pushed it open, it revealed exactly what Nelson expected. A large, rounded-out room greeted them, a dome, one that reminisced an observatory. Look, Nelson pointed at the doors across the room. Weird, she said. Everything looks backward. Right, Nelson agreed. Like we're on the other side of a mirror. Mina immediately went toward the center of the room and knelt, rubbing her hands over the top of the mosaic which lined the floor. Okay, so, Nelson said, what happened to Ailos? How did he become that? He pointed towards the dragon on the wall. The king, Syd said. His name was Dakar, and the queen, Devara, had a daughter. What was her name? Nelson asked. No one knows, Mina said. Well, one person knows, Syd corrected her. The dragon? Nelson asked. Syd nodded. The princess was the light of the kingdom. Everyone loved her, but on her 18th birthday, she grew sick, bedridden. The whole kingdom fell into sadness. Ailos was tasked with finding a cure. He tried using all of his magic, but nothing would work. From the middle of the mosaic, Mina spoke up. Little did the king and queen know that he had fallen in love with the princess. So he scoured every inch of Ailos, searching far and wide for any way to save her. And? Nelson asked. And then he found a tree. No way, yes, Mina continued. A mighty oak tree, just like the one that brought you here. This tree contained the breath of the Maker himself, the cure for all sickness. So he saved the princess then? Nelson asked. No, Mina replied, still searching for something in the mosaic. Unfortunately, he could not. Her sickness spread throughout her whole body, and by the time Ailos returned with the sap of the oak tree, it was too late. Dang, Nelson exclaimed. A knot twisted in his stomach. His heart ached in his chest. He knew what it was like to lose someone he loved. He didn't even get to say goodbye? He asked. Enraged, Ailos cursed the Maker and threatened to cut down the sacred tree. The king and queen, though they were devastated by their loss, knew that this kind of vengeance was dangerous. And since the Maker entrusted them with protecting all living things, they hid the tree. This infuriated the musician, and all of the power that once flowed through him to create beauty and peace began to turn inward, knotted and mangled inside of his heart. He began using his magic to try and bring the princess back to life, but at every turn he failed. Eventually, the magic consumed him. He hated everything with the image of the Maker and refused to be seen as a man. So he surrendered to the magic and took on a new form. A dragon, Syd whispered. And he declared war on all of Ailos. Only those who surrendered to him and agreed to be transformed into his likeness were spared. At this point, Syd joined Mina at the center of the mosaic. So, where is he now? Did the king and queen survive? Nelson asked. Barely, Mina said. They found a way to banish him to a third world. She pointed at the door with the dragon. But I'm afraid that door will not hold him much longer, you see. We need 3 keys to keep him bound. 3 lockets, forged by the breath of the Maker. They used the sap of the oak tree? Nelson asked. Mm-hmm, Mina agreed. And they appointed one to guard it, the guardian of Ailos. Each locket has the power to open one door at a time, but with all 3, they have endless power. Power to bind or set free, power to create, and power to destroy. But Ailos tricked the first guardian and stole her locket, corrupting it while trying to reverse the death of the princess. It gave him immortality, so the only hope the king had was to take it back and banish the dragon forever. Because he knew it wouldn't be safe to keep the locket in Ailos, the king took it and fastened it to the dragon's door, sealing it as a reminder of what lies behind. Beware the dragon's breath. Nelson hung his head, confronted again by the fact that he was the one responsible for bringing the locket to Ailos. Syd was right. I never should have touched it. Syd placed her hand on Nelson's shoulder, but he brushed it off. Okay, so if I had the dragon's breath, and Syd has the other, then where's the third? A look of sadness came over Mina's face. I left it here in Ailos. You had a locket? Nelson blurted out. I did. Dakar's locket. And 6 years ago, I started having dreams. Dreams convincing me to bring my locket back to Ailos. I don't know how, but Archalos is somehow connected to the lockets. He would speak to me. She looked at Nelson in solidarity. One day, I couldn't take it any longer. He showed me horrible things happening to the ones I loved. Mina knelt down and pressed her finger into the mosaic, into the palm of the king. Like a toy puppet, the mosaic snapped and the room began to rumble. When I showed up, I knew I had made a big mistake. A guard of demon dogs, as you call them, was waiting for me. I ran as far as I could, but eventually they found me. With the power of the locket, I was able to survive the first few attacks and retreated to this very room. But I grew hungry, and ultimately, I had no other choice but to surrender. Before I gave myself up, though, I hid my locket here. What did they do to you? This time, Syd asked the question. They took me and tortured me. They scoured my mind with their sorcery, looking for any way to find the locket. The magic they used transformed me, not just my mind, but my appearance as well. Mina pulled back her cloak, revealing the right side of her face. It's horrible, Nelson exclaimed, angered by the fact that anyone could be tortured like that. Mina shook her head. I spent years searching for the locket, but with all of the memories they took from me, I had no way of finding it. All I had was hope that one day the Maker would lead me to it. You see, the only way I could manage the loneliness and pain of losing my mind was to sing. Songs of Ailos were particularly comforting, and one night, while I was singing myself to sleep, a new vision came to me. A vision of this room, this mosaic, a vision of Dakar's locket. She held it up by the silver chain. It was all the hope I needed to escape. Mina turned to Syd. Then I met you. Something about you two started helping me remember. Fragments of my prior life started coming back. Your locket, Syd. It started to lead me back. Mina wiped a tear from her eye. It showed me who I really was, who I was really meant to be. Then the locket in Mina's hand started to glow. She raised it and placed it around her neck. Golden light exploded from the locket, and just like Syd, when she first unlocked hers, she hovered above the ground while the light imbued her. Nelson looked at Syd and mouthed the words, Did you know? She shook her head. Her eyes confirmed it. She had no idea what was going on. Not only was the light emanating from Mina, but her body was changing, healing. The scars that marred her face smoothed, and the weathered, brittle black hair strengthened. Soon, she looked like a whole new woman. The wind died down, and the final ray of light disappeared into Mina's locket. When she reached the ground, her eyes were still glowing. Nelson squinted, perplexed by her appearance. Something else changed. All of the mere familiarities, the way she smiled and talked became a clear picture. It was like watching a blurred-out picture come into focus, or a dusty mirror wiped clean. She looked a whole lot like... Mom? Syd asked, her mouth wide open in disbelief. She held her hands against her chest, bracing against the potential of bad news. Could this actually be her long-lost mother? Oh, man, Nelson exhaled. Sydney, Mina whispered. I'm so sorry. Nelson's head kept jumping between the two. Syd stood and fought back tears. Mina waited patiently with her arms outstretched. This can't be real, Syd whispered between heavy breaths. You left. I thought you were dead. I know, darling. I'm sorry. Mina hung her head. And I can't imagine how that must have hurt. She took a small step toward her daughter as she spoke. Syd didn't move. She just stood with her arms fixed around her chest, tears falling from her cheek. But I'm here now, my love. Because of you. Because of your bravery. You found me, Syd. She whispered the phrase as she opened her arms for a hug. Syd closed her eyes and then, in a moment of surrender, fell into Mina's arms. The two of them stood hugging and crying for quite some time. So, does this mean we won? Nelson asked with terrible timing. Or possibly the best timing. Syd and Mina looked at Nelson with the same annoyed look and then back at each other. They smiled and erupted with rapturous laughter. I hate to break up a good moment, but don't we still have a dragon to worry about? Yes, you're right, dear Nelson. We do indeed. First, I need to attend to our furry little friend. That's right, Nelson thought. Mina made the decision to leave Harold and Sheila back at the main basement corridor due to space and the amount of time it would take to haul an extra body. Do we have time to go all the way back there? Syd asked. I'm sure they'll be fine. Mina smiled and looked at Syd. That smile, Nelson thought. Now I know where Syd gets it. There are still things you have to learn about these lockets, sweetie. Mina winked, and in a flash of gold, she disappeared. Nelson found it hard to believe. So much information had just been revealed to them, and the more time between finding out only made him more anxious. None of the information made him confident that they could actually stop the dragon. In fact, all the extra information just made him fear the dragon more. Even while bound, he had convinced not just Nelson to set him free, but Mina, a grown-up. Locked up in a whole other realm, and still Ailos seemed to be winning. That kind of power frightened him. Nelson found a spot far from the doors to rest while Mina was off tending to Harold, and Syd walked the room with her book. His head was still resting in his hands when with a sudden rush of wind the room filled with bright light. In a twinkle of an eye, Mina, Harold, and Sheila were standing at the center of the room. Oh, good, Syd said. You're back. Ah, Harold called out from behind Mina's legs. Harold, Syd shouted. Look at you. The marmot bolted toward her and leapt up into her arms. Filled with joy, Syd laughed as the little guy licked her face with vigor. I'm happy you're feeling better too, Syd said. How is this possible? Nelson asked, still keeping his distance, but now standing in awe. Harold stopped licking Syd's face instantly. His small head turned toward Nelson. Oh, no, it's okay, buddy. I don't... But it was too late. Harold zipped over and up Nelson's leg, around his belly, and up onto his shoulder. Nelson turned his head, wincing in anticipation of a flurry of tongue lashings. Instead, Harold just smiled, wrapped his furry little arms around Nelson's face, and squeezed. A low hum followed the warm embrace. As Harold's furry arms embraced him, Nelson felt a warmth spread through his chest. Despite all the fears and uncertainties swirling in his mind, in this moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. Mina watched the scene with a tender smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You see, children, she said softly, this is the power we're fighting for. The power of love, of friendship, of healing. This is what Ailos has forgotten, and what he seeks to destroy. Syd looked at her mother, a mix of emotions playing across her face. But how do we stop him? He's so powerful, and we're just us. Mina's face grew serious. We may be us, but we have something Ailos doesn't. We have each other, and we have the lockets. Most importantly, we have hope. She touched her locket, and it glowed softly. Now, we need to prepare. Ailos won't stay dormant for long now that his locket has been retrieved. We need to be ready when he makes his move. As they gathered around Mina, ready to plan their next steps, Nelson couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. Yes, they were facing a powerful enemy. Yes, the odds seemed stacked against them. But looking at Syd, at Mina, at Harold, and even at Sheila, he knew that together they stood a chance. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The light from the locket seemed to pulse in agreement, casting a warm glow over the group. The battle for Ailos and for their own world was far from over, but in this moment, in this ancient room, hope burned bright. Thanks for listening to Chapter 11 of The Guardian of Ailos. As a reminder, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment or come find us on Substack, and we'll be right back next week with Chapter 12.